Long before cities rose or names were spoken, the Valley of Mexico rested in quiet balance. Wide lakes reflected the slow movement of clouds, and mountains stood like patient witnesses along the horizon. The land did not hurry. Water moved gently through reeds, birds traced soft patterns across the sky, and the earth breathed in long, steady rhythms. Nights were cool and dark, filled with distant sounds that felt more like whispers than noise. Days arrived slowly, warmed by a sun that did not yet carry stories of conquest or loss. This valley was shaped over countless ages. Rain carved paths through soil, and volcanic stones settled into the ground as if it belonged there forever. Nothing demanded attention, yet everything felt alive. The land seemed to be waiting, not for a moment, but for a people who had not yet arrived. Even in its stillness, there was a sense of quiet preparation, as if the valley knew it would one day hold voices, footsteps, and memory. Time here felt wide and unmeasured. There were no borders, no rulers, no cities reflected in the water, only space, silence, and possibility. The calm of the valley did not feel empty. It felt full in a different way, filled with the promise of something that had not yet taken shape. And within that silence, the first hints of movement were already beginning to form. Long before the Aztecs would walk these lands, others had already left their marks upon the earth. Civilizations rose, shaped the valley, and slowly faded back into memory. The Olmecs carved stone faces that watched time pass without speaking. The builders of Teotihuacan raised vast pyramids aligned with the sun and stars, creating a city that once pulsed with life and belief. Even after these cities grew quiet, their presence lingered, resting beneath soil and stone. These earlier peoples understood the land deeply. They followed the rhythms of seasons, honored the movement of the sky, and shaped their lives around cycles older than written history. Roads were walked smooth by generations of feet. Temples held prayers that drifted upward and disappeared into the air. When these civilizations faded, they did not vanish completely. Their ideas, symbols, and ways of seeing the world remained, scattered like seeds across the valley. The land remembered them. Broken walls, abandoned structures, and sacred sites continued to influence those who came later. The past did not feel distant here. It felt close, layered beneath the present, waiting to be touched again. Whoever would rise next would not begin from nothing. They would inherit a world already shaped by belief, effort, and time, even if they did not yet know it. Before stories were written down, they were carried softly from one voice to another. Myths moved through time like gentle currents, shaping how people understood the world around them. These stories explained the sun's journey, the turning of seasons, and the fragile balance between life and death. They were not told loudly. They were shared in quiet moments, meant to be felt as much as understood. In these myths, gods walked close to the earth. They shaped mountains, guided rivers, and demanded respect in return for order. The universe was seen as something living, constantly shifting, always in need of care. Nothing was permanent, and nothing existed without purpose. Even destruction held meaning, making room for renewal. These stories did more than explain the past. They pointed forward. They suggested that history followed a pattern,
guided by signs and promises. To listen to myth was to listen for direction. Long before the Aztecs arrived, the ideas that would guide them were already forming, drifting through generations like echoes waiting to be answered. And as these myths continued to flow, they quietly prepared the way for a people who would one day see themselves reflected within them. Far from the quiet valley, people were beginning their long journey, though the land did not yet know their names. They carried no grand cities with them, only memory, belief, and endurance. They were shaped by movement, by nights under open skies, and by stories that promised a place where they would finally belong. Their path was uncertain, but their direction felt guided by something deeper than choice alone. The valley remained still as these distant travelers moved closer with each passing generation. Lakes continued to shimmer, mountains held their silence, and the earth waited without urgency. When the time came, it would receive them as it had received all others before. But this meeting would be different. The people approaching would listen closely to the land, reading signs in water, stone, and sky. Though they had not yet arrived, their future was already intertwined with this place. The quiet valley was no longer just empty space. It was becoming a destination. And as the first chapter of their story prepared to unfold, the silence gently gave way to the promise of motion, carrying both the land and its future inhabitants toward the next turning of time. The journey began far from the lakes and valleys that would one day define their world. In the north, the land was harsher, marked by wide plains and long stretches of uncertainty. Here, life demanded movement. Seasons shifted without warning, and survival depended on knowing when to stay and when to leave. Over time, the people who would become the Aztecs learned that stillness could be dangerous and that walking forward was often the only choice. They left behind familiar paths and places shaped by memory. What they carried could not be weighed or measured. Songs, stories, and shared belief traveled with them, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Each step forward was guided by trust rather than certainty. The road ahead was unclear, but the decision to move had already been made long before. As they traveled, the land changed slowly beneath their feet. Dry ground gave way to greener stretches, and distant mountains appeared and disappeared along the horizon. Nights were spent beneath open skies, where stars became markers of direction and comfort. Though the journey was long, it did not feel rushed. It unfolded at the pace of life itself, steady and patient, shaping the people as much as they shaped their path.
Belief walked beside them like a quiet companion. It was not something distant or abstract, but a presence woven into daily life. The people believed they were guided by unseen forces, by gods who spoke through signs rather than words. Dreams, symbols, and moments of coincidence were treated with care, listened to closely for meaning. At the center of their belief was a promise. One day they would find a place meant for them, marked by a sign that could not be mistaken. Until then, every step was part of preparation. Faith did not remove hardship, but it softened it. When food was scarce or the path grew difficult, belief offered reassurance that the journey itself held purpose. Rituals remained simple, shaped by travel rather than permanence. Offerings were made wherever they rested, acknowledging the land beneath them and the sky above. In this way, belief adapted to movement, never fixed in one place. It flowed with them, steady and quiet, turning uncertainty into direction. Through belief, the journey became more than wandering. It became a story unfolding, one step at a time. Time passed differently on the road. Years blended together, marked not by calendars, but by changing landscapes and growing children. The people lived between departure and arrival, without walls to protect them or fields to claim as their own. Home became something temporary, shaped by wherever they rested at night. This life demanded resilience. Camps were built and taken down again, leaving little trace behind. Knowledge of plants, water sources, and safe paths was shared carefully, ensuring survival across generations. Elders carried memory, while the young learned quickly, adapting to the rhythm of movement as something natural rather than burdensome. Despite the hardship, there was also freedom. Without fixed borders, the land was wide and open. Each new place offered lessons, shaping their understanding of the world. Over time, the journey itself became part of their identity. They were not defined by where they came from, but by how far they had traveled. And though the road seemed endless, belief quietly insisted that it would not always be this way. As generations passed, the promise remained unchanged. Somewhere ahead, a sign waited. It would reveal the place where movement would finally give way to settlement. The people watched the world carefully, reading meaning into nature's smallest details. A bird's flight, the shape of the land, or the meeting of water and stone could all hold significance. This attention did not create anxiety. It created focus. The journey continued not with impatience, but with quiet readiness. Each place they passed through felt closer than the last, even when distance could not be measured. The belief that guided them had grown stronger through time, shaped by endurance and shared experience. Then, slowly, the land began to change. Water became more present. Lakes appeared, wide and reflective, surrounded by reeds and life. The air felt different, heavier with possibility. Though the sign had not yet revealed itself, the people sensed that the end of their journey was approaching. Movement softened into observation, and anticipation settled gently among them. The road was no longer endless. It was leading somewhere specific, toward a meeting between promise and place that would soon unfold. The lakes of the valley stretched wide and still, their surfaces broken only by reeds and drifting birds. After generations of movement, the people slowed their steps here. Something about this place invited attention. The water reflected the sky with unusual clarity, and the surrounding land felt balanced, neither harsh nor overly generous. It was here that the sign they had carried in memory for so long finally revealed itself. An eagle rested upon a cactus, its wings steady, its presence unmistakable. This moment did not arrive with noise or drama. It appeared quietly, as if it had always been waiting. The people gathered without urgency, recognizing what they saw without the need for explanation. Belief, memory, and sight aligned into a single understanding. This was the place. The lake no longer felt like an obstacle. It felt like protection. The water that surrounded the small island promised both challenge and safety, demanding effort while offering separation from rivals. In this still moment, the long journey found its meaning. The sign did not end the story. It began a new one, rooted in water, faith, and resolve. Settling on a lake required imagination as much as labor. The land beneath their feet was soft and shifting, but the people adapted quickly. They learned to anchor themselves to the water rather than resist it. Wooden posts were driven into the lakebed, forming foundations where none had existed before. Stone, mud, and reed were shaped into platforms that slowly grew more stable with time. The movement did not stop. Canoes replaced long roads, gliding silently across the water. The lake became a network of paths rather than a barrier. Causeways stretched outward, connecting the island to the surrounding shores. Each structure was built with patience, adjusted again and again as the water tested its strength. What emerged did not feel forced. The city grew in conversation with the lake, rising gradually as if shaped by the water itself. Reflection and reality blended together. Buildings mirrored the sky, and the city seemed to float between worlds. This way of building required constant care, but it also created harmony. The people were no longer simply occupying the land, they were becoming part of it. Life in the new settlement demanded balance. Food, water, and shelter were secured through careful planning and shared effort. Fields were created where none seemed possible, floating gardens that transformed shallow water into fertile ground. Crops grew close to the city, sustained by lake water and steady labor. This innovation allowed the settlement to breathe, feeding itself while remaining surrounded by water. Fishing supplemented harvests, and trade began to take shape along the waterways. Canoes carried goods quietly, connecting the growing city to nearby communities. Survival depended not on isolation, but on exchange. Relationships formed slowly, built on necessity rather than dominance. Challenges were constant, but they did not overwhelm. Floods tested structures, and shortages demanded adaptation. Each difficulty refined their approach, strengthening both knowledge and unity. The people learned to listen closely to their environment, responding rather than resisting. Over time, survival became routine, woven into daily life. The city endured not because it ignored hardship, but because it learned how to live with it. As years passed, the settlement transformed into something more than shelter. Temples rose carefully, aligned with the sky and the movement of time. Public spaces formed where voices gathered and stories were shared. The city developed a rhythm shaped by work, ritual, and rest. Mornings brought movement across water, while evenings softened into reflection. Sound filled the air gently, the splash of paddles, the call of traders, and the distant tones of ceremony blended into a steady presence. The city felt alive, not loud, but aware. Each part supported the whole, creating a sense of belonging that had been absent during years of wandering. Memory anchored itself here. The journey was not forgotten, but it no longer defined every step. Roots took hold in water and stone. The city did not rush to become powerful. It focused on stability, learning its own shape and limits. Tenochtitlan was no longer a destination imagined through belief alone. It was real, breathing quietly at the center of the lake, preparing, without urgency, for everything that would follow. For the people of Tenochtitlan, the world was never empty or silent. It was filled with presence. Gods were not distant figures watching from afar, but forces woven into every part of life. The sun rising each morning, the rain touching the lake, and the earth holding the city in place were all expressions of divine movement. Nothing happened by chance, and nothing stood alone. Each god carried responsibility, shaping a specific part of existence. Some governed light and warmth, others controlled rain, fertility, or the quiet movement of time. These forces were respected rather than feared, approached with care rather than demand. Life was understood as a shared effort between humans and the unseen, each dependent on the other to maintain balance. Temples rose as points of connection, places where the city reached upward and the gods were invited closer. These spaces were calm rather than overwhelming, designed to remind people of their place within a larger pattern. The presence of the gods did not disrupt daily life, it gave it structure. Through belief, the city learned how to move in harmony with forces it could not fully see, but deeply felt. Time was not seen as a straight line moving forward. It was circular, repeating, and alive. Days followed nights, seasons followed seasons, and the sun traced the same path across the sky again and again. This repetition was comforting, offering reassurance that the world remained in balance as long as its rhythms were respected. The sun held special meaning. Its journey across the sky was understood as effort, not inevitability. Each dawn marked renewal, while each sunset carried quiet gratitude. Calendars tracked sacred cycles, guiding ceremonies and daily decisions alike. Time was measured not only to plan, but to understand one's place within the greater flow of existence.
These cycles shaped behavior gently. When to plant, when to rest, and when to gather were all guided by the movement of the sky. Nothing was rushed. Waiting was part of wisdom. By aligning themselves with these rhythms, the people felt connected to something steady and enduring. Time was not an enemy pressing forward. It was a companion, circling patiently, carrying both memory and expectation together. Rituals formed the quiet heart of the city. They marked transitions, honored change, and maintained balance between the visible and unseen worlds. These moments were approached with focus rather than spectacle. Movements were deliberate, words carefully chosen, and silence treated with respect. Ritual did not interrupt life, it supported it. Offerings were given as gestures of gratitude and responsibility. They acknowledged that survival depended on more than effort alone. Food, water, and sunlight were received rather than claimed. Through ritual, the people expressed awareness of this exchange, reinforcing humility and care. Participation was shared across the community. These moments created unity, drawing individuals into something larger without removing their sense of self. Rituals were repeated often, not because they lost meaning, but because repetition deepened understanding. Each performance felt slightly different, shaped by time and circumstance. Through these practices, meaning was maintained. The city remembered who it was and how it fit into the world. Rituals did not promise control, they offered connections. In that connection, the people found steadiness, grounding their lives within a universe that was constantly moving, yet gently ordered. At the center of Aztec belief was balance. The universe was understood as fragile, held together through careful exchange. Light depended on darkness, growth followed decay, and life existed alongside death without contradiction. Nothing could exist alone for long without disturbing the whole. This understanding shaped how the people viewed themselves. Humans were not masters of the world, but participants within it. Their actions mattered not because they ruled nature, but because they influenced harmony. Responsibility replaced dominance, and care guided decision-making. The city itself reflected this balance.
Built upon water, yet anchored by stone, it existed between worlds. Daily life blended work with rest, movement with stillness. Even belief allowed space for uncertainty, acknowledging that not everything could be fully known. By accepting balance rather than resisting it, the people created a sense of calm within complexity. The universe did not feel chaotic, it felt responsive. As long as care was taken, order would remain. And within that understanding, Tenochtitlan continued to grow quietly, supported by the belief that the world, though vast and powerful, could remain in harmony through mindful presence. As Tenochtitlan settled into its place upon the lake, strength began to form quietly rather than suddenly. The city did not wake one morning as an empire. Power gathered slowly, shaped by patience, planning, and awareness of the world beyond its waters. Leaders emerged who understood that stability was as important as ambition. They observed neighboring communities, learning when to act and when to wait.
Trade expanded first. Goods moved across water and land, weaving the city into a growing network of exchange. With trade came influence. Relationships were built through shared need, offering protection or access in return for loyalty. Power here did not always arrive through force. Often it arrived through presence, through being necessary. Over time, confidence grew. The city learned its own strength, supported by its unique position and unity of purpose. Success reinforced belief, and belief reinforced action. Expansion was no longer an idea whispered quietly. It became a direction, followed with measured steps. This rise did not feel rushed or unstable. It unfolded naturally, like a tide responding to the pull of the moon. The city stood firmly upon water and stone, ready to reach outward, carrying its identity beyond the lake without losing the balance that had shaped its beginning. Conflict, when it came, followed its own rhythm. War was not seen as chaos, but as a structured extension of duty. Battles were planned carefully, guided by rules that reflected belief as much as strategy. Victory mattered, but how it was achieved mattered just as deeply. Warriors trained with discipline, learning not only how to fight, but how to move with purpose. Courage was valued, but restraint earned equal respect. Capture often held more meaning than destruction, reinforcing the idea that conflict served balance rather than pure domination. Preparation began long before any clash. Rituals accompanied departure, grounding action in belief. These moments reminded warriors that they carried responsibility not only to their city, but to the world that supported it. Each movement was part of a larger pattern. Through war, the city expanded its reach, but it also tested its values. Honor remained central, shaping how power was used and understood. Conflict did not disrupt order, it reinforced it, defining boundaries and reinforcing identity. In this way, expansion remained controlled, guided by principles that prevented strength from dissolving into excess. As influence spread, systems emerged to support it. Tribute became the quiet mechanism through which power flowed back toward the city. Goods arrived steadily: food, textiles, precious materials, and crafted items shaped by distant hands. These offerings were not random, they followed structure, reinforcing order through repetition. Tribute supported the city's growth, feeding its people and sustaining its rituals. It also acted as a reminder of connection. Each delivery represented a relationship, a recognition of authority balanced by protection. Control did not always require presence,
It was maintained through expectation and routine. Administration grew alongside tribute. Messengers traveled efficiently, carrying information rather than force. Records were kept carefully, ensuring balance between what was given and what was owed. Power here was organized, not reckless. Through these systems, the city maintained stability even as it expanded. Control felt steady rather than oppressive, woven into daily operations rather than enforced through constant threat. The empire breathed calmly, supported by structure that allowed growth without overwhelming the center that held it together.
As the empire grew, its reputation traveled ahead of it. Stories moved faster than armies, shaping perception before contact occurred. Some communities felt fear, others respect, and many felt both at once. Power often carries this dual presence, offering protection while inspiring caution. The city understood this balance and did not ignore it. Fear was never allowed to become the only tool. Respect was cultivated through consistency and response. Those who honored agreements found stability. Those who resisted learned the weight of consequence. Order was maintained through clarity rather than constant display. Within the empire, this balance shaped identity. The people saw themselves not as conquerors without restraint, but as caretakers of a growing system. Strength was acknowledged, but excess was avoided. The memory of wandering remained close, reminding them that power, like stability, could change. The empire stood firm, not loud or restless. Its expansion slowed into maintenance, ensuring that what had been gained could be held. Beneath the surface of control and reputation, the city continued its steady rhythm, preparing quietly for the changes that would eventually test everything it had built. As the city expanded, daily life settled into a steady rhythm shaped by exchange and motion. Markets became the heart of this rhythm. Each morning, canoes arrived quietly, gliding across the water with goods gathered from near and far. Food, tools, textiles, and crafted objects changed hands in an atmosphere that felt focused rather than hurried. Voices rose and softened, blending into a gentle background hum. These markets were more than places of trade. They were spaces of connection. News traveled alongside goods, carried casually between conversations. People learned what was happening beyond the lake without leaving the city. The act of exchange strengthened relationships, reminding everyone that survival depended on shared effort. Order guided the movement. Each item had its place, each role understood. Nothing felt chaotic. Even the busiest moments moved with calm purpose. The market reflected the city itself, structured yet alive, shaped by balance rather than urgency. When evening approached, movement slowed. Canoes returned home, and the open spaces grew quiet again. The rhythm repeated the next day, unchanged yet never dull. Through this steady flow, daily life remained grounded, allowing the city to function smoothly while maintaining the calm that defined its character. At the center of daily life stood the household. Families lived close together, sharing responsibilities and space. Children learned by watching, absorbing knowledge through repetition rather than instruction alone. Elders guided gently, passing down memory through stories told in quiet moments. Community extended beyond the home. Neighbors supported one another, bound by shared work and ritual. Cooperation was essential, especially in a city built on water. Maintenance of structures, gardens, and pathways required collective care. This shared effort created trust, reinforcing unity without the need for constant authority. Life unfolded at a patient pace. Meals were simple but meaningful, eaten together when possible. Evenings offered rest rather than distraction. The city did not demand constant attention. It allowed space for reflection, for conversation, and for silence.
Through these patterns, belonging formed naturally. Identity was not defined by ambition alone, but by contribution. Each person had a role, and each role mattered. This sense of place grounded the people, ensuring that daily life remained stable even as the empire continued to grow outward. Knowledge flowed quietly through the city. Learning was woven into life rather than separated from it. Children were taught skills needed for survival, while also absorbing stories that shaped understanding of the world. Memory was valued, preserved through repetition and shared experience. Art emerged naturally from this process. Poetry, song, and crafted objects reflected both beauty and meaning. Expression was not created for excess, but for balance. Art honored nature, belief, and the passage of time. It softened daily life, offering moments of stillness within routine. Education emphasized responsibility. Understanding one's place within the community mattered as much as individual skill. Learning encouraged awareness rather than dominance, preparing people to live thoughtfully within a larger system. Through expression, the city breathed more deeply. Creativity offered release without disruption, enriching life without overwhelming it. In these quiet forms of learning and art, daily existence gained depth, allowing the people to feel connected not only to one another, but to the world that supported them. Each day followed a gentle pattern shaped by light and rest. Morning brought movement, afternoon brought focus, and evening brought calm. The city responded naturally to these shifts, adjusting without resistance. Sound rose and faded in waves, never overwhelming. Water reflected the changing sky, reminding everyone of time's passage. The city seemed to breathe alongside its people, expanding and contracting with shared rhythm. Nothing felt rushed, nothing felt idle. Balance guided each moment. This rhythm created comfort. Even within complexity, life remained predictable in its flow. People knew when to act and when to pause. The city supported this awareness, offering structure without pressure. As night settled, lights dimmed and voices softened. The lake grew still, holding reflections of stars and temples alike. In this quiet closing, daily life completed its cycle, ready to begin again. Through this steady rhythm, the Aztec world sustained itself, grounded in routine, calm, and continuity. Over time, the steady rhythm of the city began to carry subtle interruptions. They were not loud or sudden, but gentle enough to be noticed by those who paid close attention. Unusual sights appeared in the sky. Light behaved differently at dawn and dusk. Sounds carried farther across the lake at night. These moments did not cause immediate fear, but they invited quiet reflection. People spoke of these signs softly, sharing observations rather than conclusions. The world had always communicated through patterns, and these changes felt like messages waiting to be understood. Nothing felt broken, yet something felt unsettled. The balance that had once seemed effortless now required attention. The city continued its routines, but awareness deepened. Rituals took on a slightly heavier tone, marked by longer silences and careful thought. Elders remembered older stories, ones that spoke of change arriving not with force, but with warning.
These omens were not interpreted as endings, but as signals that the world was shifting its direction. Life did not stop. It slowed inward. The city listened more closely to itself, sensing that the familiar rhythm was beginning to bend. The lake reflected the same sky as always, yet even its surface seemed to hold questions that did not ask for quick answers. From the outside, the empire appeared strong and unchanged. Trade continued, markets opened each day, and rituals followed their cycles. Yet beneath this stability, a quiet unease began to settle. It did not disrupt daily life, but it softened confidence. People felt it in moments of pause, in thoughts that lingered longer than before. Leaders noticed it as well. Decisions were made more carefully, guided by caution rather than certainty. Power remained, but it no longer felt effortless. The city had grown large, and maintaining balance required greater awareness. Every action seemed to carry more weight than before. This unease was not panic, it was a reflection. The memory of wandering had never fully disappeared, and it returned now as a reminder. Change was part of the world's rhythm, just as stability had been. Nothing could remain fixed forever, no matter how carefully it was built. The people did not resist this feeling. They carried it gently, allowing it to exist without control. In doing so, they preserved calm even as uncertainty grew. The city continued to breathe, steady but thoughtful, sensing that something beyond its control was slowly approaching. As signs continued to appear, ancient prophecies resurfaced in memory. Stories once told as distant possibilities were now recalled with renewed attention. These prophecies spoke of cycles, of worlds renewing themselves through transformation. They did not describe destruction alone, but transition. Elders shared these stories carefully without urgency. They were reminders rather than warnings. The universe, according to belief, moved through phases of creation and change, each necessary for balance. Nothing ended without something else beginning. Listening to these words brought mixed feelings. Comfort came from familiarity, while uncertainty lingered in what could not be predicted. The prophecy did not offer timelines or details, it offered perspective. Change was not punishment, it was a movement. The city absorbed these ideas quietly. Rituals acknowledged the possibility of transition, asking not for preservation at all costs, but for guidance. Memory and belief worked together, softening fear into understanding. The people did not know what form change would take, but they accepted that it was part of the world they had always known. Waiting became its own state of being, not waiting with impatience, but with awareness. The city continued to function, but its attention turned outward, toward the horizon and beyond the lake. Travelers brought distant stories, hints of unfamiliar movement far from the valley. These stories were listened to without alarm. They added to the growing sense that the world was expanding beyond familiar boundaries. The unknown no longer felt abstract. It felt closer, approaching slowly, carried by currents that could not be redirected. Despite this, calm remained. The city did not rush to prepare for something it could not define. It trusted the balance that had carried it this far. Daily life continued, rituals remained steady, and belief provided grounding. In this quiet waiting, the city rested between what it had been and what it would become. The night grew still over the lake, and reflections deepened. Change had not yet arrived,
but its presence was already felt, resting gently at the edge of awareness, preparing the world for the final turning of the story. The first signs arrived across the water and through distant reports, carried gently rather than announced. Strange vessels moved along unfamiliar paths, and unfamiliar faces appeared where none had been before. These arrivals did not immediately feel threatening. They felt confusing, like pieces of a story that did not yet fit together. Curiosity came first, followed by careful observation.
The city watched quietly. Messengers moved calmly, gathering information without urgency. The newcomers carried objects made of unknown materials and spoke sounds that did not align with familiar patterns. Yet they walked, breathed, and rested like anyone else. The world did not end upon their arrival. It shifted. Meetings took place with patience. Words were exchanged through gesture and effort. Each side tried to understand the other, filling silence with interpretation. The lake reflected these moments without judgment, holding both certainty and doubt in equal measure. For the people of Tenochtitlan, this arrival felt like the fulfillment of something long remembered. Prophecy and present touched lightly, without clarity. Nothing was decided immediately. Life continued. Rituals remained. The city did not collapse into fear. It paused, attentive, sensing that a door had opened somewhere beyond sight, and that once opened, it would not easily close again. Tension grew slowly, not as an explosion, but as strain. Understanding faltered where meaning could not be shared. Trust weakened through confusion rather than intent. Actions were misread, and silence filled the space where clarity was needed. The balance that had once guided the city began to stretch beyond comfort. Conflict did not arrive all at once. It came in moments, each heavier than the last. Familiar paths became uncertain. Alliances shifted under pressure. The city that had grown through patience now faced forces that did not follow its rhythms. Illness moved quietly, changing daily life in ways that could not be seen immediately. Strength faded unevenly, leaving gaps where stability had once lived. Effort continued, but the weight grew harder to carry. The lake, once a shield, felt closer, its stillness reflecting loss. Even in this breaking, there was no chaos. The city responded with the same care it had always shown. Resistance existed, but exhaustion followed closely behind. The world did not end suddenly. It thinned, piece by piece, until what remained felt fragile and quiet, holding on through memory rather than strength. When the final moments came, they did not arrive with clear boundaries. There was no single point where the empire stopped and something else began. Authority faded gradually, like light at dusk. Structures remained, but their meaning shifted. Power loosened its hold, leaving behind silence where certainty had once lived. The fall was not only physical, it was emotional and spiritual. Stories lost their places, rituals softened, and memory carried more weight than practice. The city endured, but it was no longer what it had been. Tenochtitlan remained upon the water, yet its heart had changed. Loss was felt deeply, but not without understanding. Cycles had always guided belief. Creation and ending were never separate. What had risen through balance now returned to it. The empire did not vanish, it transformed, dissolving into the land, the water, and the people who carried its memory forward.
In this quiet ending, there was no anger left, only reflection. The city rested, releasing its role as center of power and returning to stillness. What remained was not emptiness, but echo. After the noise faded, the valley remained. Water continued to reflect the sky. Mountains held their places, and the earth accepted what had passed. Life moved forward, shaped by what came before, but not trapped within it. Memory settled gently into the land, woven into stone, soil, and story. The Aztecs did not disappear. They lived on through language, tradition, and quiet presence. Their understanding of balance continued, even as forms changed. The world they had built no longer stood as it once did, but its influence remained, soft and enduring. Listening now, one can still feel the rhythm beneath the surface, the rise, the movement, the stillness. It all followed the same pattern. Nothing was wasted, nothing was without purpose. The story does not ask to be mourned, it asks to be remembered. As the night settles over the valley, everything grows calm again. The lake darkens, stars return, and silence holds the final shape of the story. In this quiet, the journey rests, the land breathes, and the long arc of time continues, carrying both endings and beginnings together, gently, into sleep.